Welcome back, everybody. I hope this finds you all well. Recently, I was asked to compare these two fragrances, and whilst I had the overhead camera set up, I thought I might talk about them. So if you don't know what these are, then this is Absolute Aphrodisiac by Initio Parfums. You can't tell just by looking at the bottle unless you can see the lid. Which is very hard for me to capture between the light and the camera reflections. But these metal plates really frustrate me because they get really dirty and they're hard to clean. But that's that one. And then this is Hombre 114 by Histoires de Parfums. Okay, so I was asked to compare these two. They are extremely different fragrances, even though they're both considered to be effectively ambers. So I'll try and talk you through the differences today. So I have Absolute Aphrodisiac sprayed on the back of this hand, and then I have Hombre 114 sprayed onto the back of this hand. As I mentioned, they are very, very different fragrances. I would consider the Initio fragrance to be more of a vanilla dominant fragrance to start with. Okay, so this is much sweeter. I feel like I get less amberiness from it. So amber accords are generally made up of vanilla, musk, and some kind of resin. Often the resin is labdanum or olibanum or a combination of both, but it could be other resins as well. And I think they're the sort of three main base elements to an amber accord, and then it can be changed up by adding other things like patchouli or maybe some other woody notes. But typically the vanilla, the resin, and the musk are the three main elements in an amber accord. So I feel like the amber accord in the Initio fragrance is much more vanilla dominant than this one, and probably more vanilla dominant than any other ambery type fragrance that I have. It's very, very sweet. And I believe this has castoreum in it as well, which I think is what gives it its leathery sort of nuance. But the leather in here is very subtle. Rather than being a leather note or a leather accord, it feels more like a leathery texture, if that makes sense. I feel like this one is a lot less powdery, and if there is any sort of powderiness to it, I feel it has more of a suede-y kind of vibe to it than actual powder. Whereas the Hombre 114 has a lot more resinous tones to it, I think. I definitely feel like the labdanum in here is a lot darker, so that leathery tone to it is a bit darker than in the Initio. I definitely detect frankincense in here as well, but not the sort of smoky incensey frankincense. It's more of that smooth resinous sort of frankincense that almost smells waxy in a way. This one is also much more powdery, I think, than the Initio fragrance. This is a lot more aromatic as well. It has things like thyme and geranium in it, and it's a lot more spicy too. There's nutmeg in here. There's benzoin. I think there's probably going to be benzoin in the Initio as well. But with this one, I feel like I really detect a lot more of those spicy elements. So there's probably a lot of people in FragCom that would steer away from wearing the Initio just because of the sweetness, because, you know, there's a fair contingent of us that don't like to wear overly sweet fragrances. I also feel like these Initio fragrances, they're the type of fragrance that are designed for the perfume lover who wants their perfume to be noticed by other people. Whereas Hombre 114, I feel, sits a little bit closer to the skin. It's a little bit more intimate. You can definitely still smell it, but it's not a huge projector. I feel like the Hombre 114 Sillage Cloud is a lot softer. Not in that you can't smell it, but just, I don't know, it feels like the notes smell a lot more natural and of nature, whereas I think the Initio probably has a lot more synthetics in it and maybe some molecular molecules that help to bounce it off the skin. But consequently, it feels a little bit more processed, if that makes sense. If you were to think of these as food products, then I would imagine this as being the food product that's highly processed and is in the plastic packaging, versus this one, which you'd be perhaps more likely to find in the fresh food produce aisle. Does that make sense? And I know that sounds really disparaging, and please don't take it as an insult or, me being disparaging towards Absolute Aphrodisiac, because I tell you, I love this stuff. I have worn it a lot, and I can't see how much is in the bottle, but I'm pretty sure I'm over halfway through this bottle. So don't take that as a negative. I'm just saying that the Hombre 114 feels a lot more natural, possibly a little bit more complex than the Absolute Aphrodisiac. But the Absolute Aphrodisiac is probably more of a crowd pleaser. Although I know I just said that a lot of people would prefer this one over this one, but I just mean that for frag heads, I think we're more inclined to lean towards things like this because, it has a lot more going on, it's a little bit more nuanced, and it's not super, super sweet. But when you're in the mood for sweet, then Absolute Aphrodisiac is the one for you, because it is a very sweet fragrance, but they are both very comforting, very enjoyable. I know Matt really likes this one on me. He likes the sweeter ones on me, I think, because secretly I think he really likes sweeter fragrances, but he doesn't want to wear them himself. I think he feels like he can't, whereas he's happy to smell them on me. So along that vein too, I would say that this one smells more gourmand leaning than this one. This one definitely smells more, as I mentioned, aromatic and resinous. So this one doesn't smell gourmand at all, whereas I think this one, it does smell a little bit dessert-like. I don't know if I have much else to add to those points. I think they're both beautiful. As I said, I wear them both. And I've been wearing this a lot this year, and this one I've been wearing a lot since 2019. So as I said, this bottle I'm sure is almost halfway done. I hope that helps whoever the person was. I can't remember who asked the question. It was a few weeks ago now, but I hope that helps you to distinguish between the two. If I was to pick other fragrances in my collection that I think align more closely to each one of these, just to give you a feel, I would say that for the Hombre 114, another amber that I would put in the same sort of ballpark would be Bengal Rouge by Papillon. Again, because I think this is so resinous and there's less focus on the vanilla. But the vanilla definitely plays a part. I just feel like the resins are more front and center in these amber accords. Another one that could be compared, although I'm going to run out of room in this shot, is Ombre Sultan by Serge Luttans. This one used to be compared a lot to the Hombre 114 actually in Fragcom. People used to talk about these two interchangeably all the time. This one, again, I think is more closely aligned obviously to the Hombre 114, but it also, this one is also much more aromatic as well. I find this one I think it has a bay leaf note that really gives it a very dusty, sort of dried herb vibe. And I really like this one as well. So I don't wear this one as much because this is kind of like a special bottle now. So I don't really want to wear it. I tend to not want to wear this one as much as the Hombre 114 as well because of that dusty sort of element to it. Some days is off-putting to me. I don't always want to smell like that. But in any case, I'd say that these two in my collection, if I had to compare this to other ambers in my collection, these two would be the ones that I would pick as being sort of in the same ballpark. They all smell very different, but again, what we're seeing here is, even though the Hombre 114 is quite sweet, but when you have this on one hand and this on the other, this suddenly doesn't smell so sweet anymore. And this one smells really, really, really sweet. But if you just wear the Ombre 114 by itself, obviously you do pick up a lot of that sweetness and you notice it. So that's how I would compare Ombre 114 to other ambers in my collection. And then with the Absolute Aphrodisiac, as I've been saying, this is very vanilla dominant. It's very sweet. It's almost got a sugariness about it, which, you know, is not present in the others. I had a hard time thinking of other fragrances to compare this to, because at first I wanted to say maybe Orchidée Vanille because of that vanilla in it, but then Orchidée Vanille has that really orangey tone up front, and the vanilla in Orchidée Vanille is really, really, really vanilla, and there's no sort of leathery nuance to that one. But one fragrance that did pop to mind, and I know there's going to be some outrage when I show it, but the one that popped to mind was the Shalimar Vanilla Planifolia. Obviously quite different still to this one, but this has a hugely dominant vanilla note in it. And so much so that I find it hard to wear sometimes because the vanilla just gets too much, and this is so persistent. Whereas the Initio is sort of, it's moderately lasting, but it projects a lot more. And, you know, then it kind of dies down. This one sticks around for ages and ages and ages and ages and ages. I mean, I still get several hours out of this, but this one, you know, kind of towards the end of the day, I'm almost over it. There's probably a lot of people yelling at the screen like right now saying, you can't compare Shalimar to Absolute Aphrodisiac. But the reason I picked this one was because this also has that, you know, that Shalimar leathery undertone to it. So you're still getting the leathery tones in there. But I would say that the leathery tones in here are still quite different to this one. The Initio is just so much sweeter. I mean, I'm finding it hard to find another fragrance in my collection that I can compare this to. So it's with some trepidation that I put this one in the mix, but again, this is very different to me from the original Shalimar, and you know, it's still not nearly as sweet as this one, but it does have that vanilla and it does have the leather tones to it. In all honesty, the only other one I could think of to compare it to would be Grand Soir. Again, I'm probably going to have a lot of people yelling at the screen, but I'm not saying that they smell the same, okay? I'm just trying to provide a comparison between these two and then find other ones in my collection that have some element of similarity. And the only thing I could find to compare this one to in other fragrances in my collection was either finding an amber that had the heavy vanilla with that slightly leather, or to find another amber that is really sweet. So Grand Soir is very different in the opening, obviously, but in the dry down, it's still very different to the Initio, but this is probably the other amber in my collection that is quite sweet, and it's probably, before I had the Initio, it was the sweetest amber in my collection. Again, they don't smell the same, okay? That was just what I was trying to pull out of my collection that might help to give you, I guess, a bit of an idea of where the line is between this one and this one. So I hope that was helpful. I hope I haven't muddied the water more by throwing those other fragrances in, because again, they all smell very different. But the main differences between these two are very sweet, vanilla dominant, slightly leathery if you really look for it, and a bit more synthetic sort of smelling. This one is still sweet, but not that sweet. More resin, more spice, more powdery, and a little bit more natural leaning, and more aromatic as well. I would say in Fragcom, people would say they want to wear this one more, even if they wear this one. But crowd-pleasing capacity, I think, is this one. For two reasons. One, this projects more, and it's sweeter. And sweet fragrances tend to be more crowd pleasing than non-sweet fragrances. Again, this is sweet on its own, but when you're wearing them together like I am right now, all I can pretty much smell is this one. But I would say a lot of people probably wouldn't dislike this, you know, in terms of the crowd, but they probably just wouldn't notice it as much because it does sit a little bit closer and it's not as loud. So there you go, that is my comparison of Absolute Aphrodisiac by Initio Parfums and Hombre 114. I hope I haven't offended anybody. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.